Has ever poor performance during a play or a drill threatened your confidence? Do you have to go through typical low-level stress and daily pressures? Have you ever noticed short-term random dips in motivation or engagement? Have you ever dealt with temporary, minor negative interactions with your teammates or coach, such as negative feedback during practice? I think most of you would answer yes to at least one of them. So I think it would be beneficial for all of us tonight to talk about buoyancy as well. So in general, buoyancy is the ability to deal with setbacks or problems that have to do though with everyday life. And I put there the definition and the operational definition of buoyancy. Buoyancy is also called everyday resilience. And since I brought up the term resilience, I think it makes sense to compare and contrast them a little bit and see um, if they have anything in common and where they're different. So I created this one, and let me give you an example for buoyancy. Buoyancy would be, let's say you're trying to be on time for practice every day, right? Or there was a new agility drill and you just messed it up and a coach or a teammate yelled at you. Resilience will have to be with major adversity, irregular events. For example, um, and an Achilles tendon rupture, or even worse, and I'm knocking on wood, right? Let's say a teammate passes away during practice. That's very major, that's very irregular. So based on these examples, you understand that buoyancy is something that most of the people have to deal with or are using, and resilience, not all of them. The last thing that compares and says front line versus back line, I'm going to use it in a little bit, but for now, I want you to understand that buoyancy has to do with events that are not that crucial, that important, and happen pretty much every day or every other day. So most of the people have to deal with them, okay? And that's what we're talking about. One common thing about buoyancy and resilience is that both help with mental and physical health. But you see on the left, buoyancy has to do with minor advance, bouncing back from minor adversity. Resilience on the right has to do with events that don't have to do with everyday life. So not a lot of people will have to use it. The big question here is, if you're buoyant, are you resilient? If you're resilient, are you buoyant? The answer is maybe. It's not necessary. And we can't really answer this question to what extent either. So you may know people that are pretty cool with some events that happen every day, but when something crucial, big happens, major, then they freak out, they just lose it. You may also know people that who are really freaking out pretty much with things that you consider minor, and then something major happens, and all of a sudden they just behave in a very cool way, okay? So we have noticed that, and we cannot say for sure that if you're buoyant, you're resilient, or if you're resilient, you're buoyant, okay? All right, so let's talk about let's talk about adversity and how we can use these two in conjunction. So usually when we talk about resilience, we think about using resilience after a major event hits us. So if you really think about it, what if we could manage our life in a way that we don't really need resilience? In other words, what if we could face the minor adversities as they come every day in a proactive way, so then they don't lead to resilience being needed. So what if you are a wrestler and instead of being cut for the team because you gain a lot of weight at the end of whatever, you take care of your diet every day? So what we're trying to say here is that in a lot of instances, if we can be proactive, then we could most likely avoid needing resilience. Not in all cases, but definitely in some cases. So when we talk about this proactive approach, buoyancy could be the front line, and that's what I didn't explain before, and resilience could be the back line, right? So we use the front line all the time, trying to avoid to use the back line, and when we have to, we will use the back line. Also, this frontline thing aligns with positive psychology that says learn to be adaptive, especially towards the things that you cannot adapt in your life. And also, positive psychology talks about protective and enabling factors, and protective are characteristics that lower the likelihood of a negative event, and enabling factors are characteristics that can help the desired behavior to change. So here we talk about adversity, but we see it from saying that if you are proactive and positively oriented, that's a great approach against adversity. And you can use both buoyancy and resilience. Let's talk about one more thing. We usually say that, if you attack successfully minor everyday adversity, you're buoyant. And if you attack major irregular events, you're resilient. So we pretty much define these two constructs based on the outcome, which is kind of unfair. So here we're going to try to use these two terms, leading and lagging indicators. So leading is something that changes, for example, here before buoyancy changes. Lagging would be something that will change after buoyancy changes. If you're into economics, that's something that we use a lot in economics, and a leading factor would be, for example, the stock prices go up, and that says something that they go up before the economy changes. That would be a leading factor. And let's say employment rates go up, that would be something that changes after the economy changes. That would be a lagging indicator or factor. Who cares here? Why do we care so much? Well, if something changes before that thing that we're interested in our case, buoyancy, that's predictive of buoyancy. It could be also a causal factor, we don't know, but it's definitely predictive. So if we take care of that, we may be able to predict buoyancy, okay? And if something changes after buoyancy changes, that could be a consequence factor. Let's see it here, and let's see what I mean, and let's see why this is important. If something predicts buoyancy, we can definitely focus on that when we're talking about developing buoyancy, when we're talking about developing interventions that have to do with buoyancy, right? Of course, lagging has to do with going back and checking if those interventions worked, because those change after buoyancy levels changed. So did you actually face those minor everyday events successfully? That would be lagging, right? Leading factor is, as you can see here, some examples: confidence or high self-efficacy, coordination or high planning, composure or low anxiety, and commitment or high persistence. Those are things that if we change them, they can predict changes in buoyancy, right? So for example, here, we do know that men have higher levels of buoyancy than women. And when we try to explain that, we explain that with one of those predictors, with anxiety, because we also know that men have lower levels of anxiety. So that makes sense, right? So that's another thing we should think as coaches or as psychologists, for example, or as even athletes, that if I can lower my anxiety, and I can see that based on gender, if I lower my anxiety, I would expect higher levels of buoyancy, which is what we're looking for. All right, this is the last thing about buoyancy. And I have here in front of me the definition in physics. So in physics, buoyancy or upthrust is an upward force exerted by a fluid that opposes the weight of a partially or fully immersed object. And I share that because I don't know if we have any divers in between us tonight, but you know that really good divers can control their buoyancy. Controlling the buoyancy is important. And that's why diving schools teach that, because they know it can be developed. So diving schools try to teach their students how to determine the exact weight they need, how to trim their gear so they're balanced in the water, or how to streamline to save energy. In a similar fashion, here we're talking about mental toughness and facing adversity. Buoyancy is really important. Buoyancy can make a difference, and buoyancy can be developed. So while we're trying to develop that everyday resilience, as we proved, I hope, before, we should focus on those leading factors first. Okay? And we should never forget that being buoyant doesn't mean that you are resilient. Okay? So I don't know if Jordan wants to help me again one more time, one last time. I would be thankful.
Yep, I can do that. Buoyancy is the ability to effectively execute the required skills and processes in response to the challenges and pressures of everyday life. Buoyancy is everyday resilience. Buoyancy is a necessary but not sufficient condition for resilience. The more minor adversities we face successfully now, buoyancy, the fewer major events we have to face later, resilience. Being proactive and positively oriented may be an ideal approach against adversity, using leading and lagging indicators for acquiring more explanatory power against adversity.
Thanks, Jordan. I appreciate it.